Anthony Hansen actually coordinates the scouting effort that is funded by the wheat growers, but he is giving a presentation in the cities today at the CPM short course. And so I'll try to fill in for him because I use the data. When you see disease updates during the growing season on crop news, or you hear me talk about diseases and scab risk, that comes from the data that's collected here and the models that we use to talk about, and get a feel for what the crops are doing and the diseases are. So the initial survey plans were this year, similar to other years, is to get about 100 fields. We no longer just randomly select fields. We've had in the couple of years ago, we changed that to where you have to volunteer fields. Oh, you don't want me to walk around? Sorry. And we do that, so we actually ask for your permission, and we worked with the University of Minnesota General Counsel, the lawyers, so we have the permission to collect the data, et cetera, et cetera. We didn't get enough fields probably this past year either, but in the end that didn't matter because we like to get 3 scouts and we could only find 1. I don't know if you've had problems attracting and keeping your employees, but in the university we're struggling right now to find qualified help and be able to pay them. In the grant, we could pay as much as $15 an hour. We were told by administration in the beginning of the year we could not go above $13. How many of you are paying $13 an hour right now to, even a high school student that helps driving, your truck? Your kid wouldn't even work for you right now for that amount. And so we're not competitive. That impacted basically, so we only had 1 scout running around. We do a number, we start in the season early, really look at the early diseases, tan spot, septoria, and leaf rust. And then we do very late in the season, we want to evaluate how much scab there was and how much soft fly there was. And then we pawn the scouts off to the soybean project, and they do their scouting in soybeans. Like I said, we only had 1 scout in Moorhead. That makes that you don't get a good sample. Now, the fortunate thing is we share all our data with North Dakota. And North Dakota does the legwork on making the maps and looking, and so even if our data density isn't the greatest, because we share the data, we can still infer some things. I wish we had more scouts and more fields, but we do share the effort, and collectively we get therefore a better data set. So this is the growth staging. You get maps like this. And as you know, initially it was late and wet, but in the end, everything turned off. If you recall, so we could find tan spot. Okay, that's not necessarily, and especially in the winter wheat. I had Jerry in Crookston in the variety trial, and it was lit up like a Christmas tree. In Tampa, which are palm trees, which is weird. So we had really, tan spot took off the way we expected to. You may recall my update saying bacterial leaf streak is really starting. But if you look here, basically very low incidence. So when the scout was in North Dakota and Minnesota, when they would be at fields at the time that they were scouting for bacterial leaf streak, they didn't see it. I could see it in the nurseries across the valley, and I would tell Jim Anderson, it's coming. Give it another week, and I think you're going to have a really good screening nursery. And in that second week, or basically right around heading, and the week after, everything turned off. Leaf rust turned off, bacterial leaf streak turned off, and in the end, we didn't find any, for instance, Fusarium head blight. And so, in many ways, it was a very boring year, which, if you're a pathologist, you like to see, hell on earth, because then you get something to report. If you're a grower, you go like, good, nice, don't have to worry about it. So we could find tan speed at the end of the season still a little bit. Ergot has been more of a problem in central North Dakota for ever so often. This was the first year that I had a couple of spots basically in Bigland Township and 2 wards a little bit south of Climax where we found ergot and growers would report to me. And it was only, and this is also again weird, on the early seeded wheat, which I wouldn't have expected given the temperatures, because ergot really only takes off if there's 2 things happening: sterility, which means you have to have heat stress during pollination. But I know there were a couple of elevators in that, East Grand Forks or Grand Forks, Climax, Thompson, that talked about we see ergot. The rest of the valley did not. So it was, very little to report, and unfortunately with only 1 scout. So insect-wise, wheat stem sawfly, again, we can't find it in the survey. I get calls from growers. What is this? I know it's all the way up to basically the Canadian border, but it's here and there a field that individual growers report to me. We can't find it necessarily in the scouting efforts. Now that might say something about the quality of the scouts or the amount of miles they walk in each individual field, because with, for instance, wheat stem sawfly, the distribution in the field is very uneven. It's much different than it is, for instance, for tan spot. And so you have to walk all 4 edges of the field to really get a good feel for wheat stem sawfly damage. There's always wheat stem maggot. There were grasshoppers. And despite the wet and late spring, I know there were acres that got sprayed for grasshoppers. So I'll just go quick because here you are at, the field margins. You're at threshold basically when you get those kinds of numbers in the valley. So the Southern Valley, I know, got sprayed for grasshoppers. So, like I said, I use all this data for the small grain disease updates during the season. That's, I think, the best way to use this data to connect you right away with what we see. And so that you have a feel, and that's important for stuff like, especially important for stuff like stem rust, which has to come in from the south. It's very important for aphids because they have to come from the south. And so those in the Northern Valley benefit from your colleagues in the south and the acreage in the south because they will be your canary in the coal mine. And we do some webinars in like strategic farming during the summer. And you gotta always remember, you might not necessarily be subscribed to crop news, but the Red River Farm Network is. So Randy will call me when I write something, and you will get to hear about it if you don't want to read crop news. So I had to put this picture in because that's the first scout I've ever had probably that had her nails so well manicured. Those are not that's not my thumb. With that, any questions? Sorry, I probably have given better talks in the past, but I'm running on fumes. I am not an entomologist. I just play one ever so often in the case of wheat stem sawfly. Grasshoppers, we would really need to talk to Ian McCrae if there is indeed, you know, what you're implying is, are we getting grasshopper populations that are resistant to certain insecticides or have tolerance? I don't think grasshoppers are anywhere close to a Colorado potato beetle, because that's the poster child for insecticide resistance. They can chew to chemistries like there's no tomorrow, and you run in resistance issues in a very, very fast way. I don't know. But one of the things that we have to think about is how large were they and what were the conditions during spraying? You know, a lot of the insecticides, for instance, break down relatively quick in UV light. And so if you don't get them directly, did they get enough? But Ian is the one that really should answer that question.